Welcome, viewers. Thank you so much for tuning in to Diversity Dignified, formerly Gender Dignity, Unique and Equal. I feel very fortunate today. I have a gentleman, Cydney Bullens, from Portland. I'm a Portland native, and of a caliber I'm not used to. He has been nominated twice for Grammys. He's worked with folks such as Sir Elton John and Bob Crewe, Bob Dylan, Rod Stewart. And normally I would launch into asking what his credits are, but if I did this, it would probably take the entire show just to do that. So today's piece is just going to be a human interest story. Very fortunate we're going to hear a few songs by Cyd. He's all over nationally. He performs. He has a very interesting story, and I think you're going to like hearing about it. So I'm going to launch this over to you, Cyd. And just in the spirit of Diversity Dignified, would you mind introducing yourself to the audience, starting with your name, your pronouns, and only a few of your credits?
My name is Cydney Bullens. My nickname's Cyd, which everyone calls me. I go by he. I'm a transgendered male. So my pronouns are masculine. And a few of my credits you mentioned. I was in Elton John's band in the late or in the mid 70s and sang on a few of his albums. I sang 3 lead vocals on the Grease movie soundtrack, wow. Which people find interesting as Cydney Bullens. These are all as Cydney Bullens. Right now, I think my most important credit is that I've written and am performing my own solo show called Somewhere Between, Not an Ordinary Life, which is about my life from 1974 through the present.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that then? Tell
Sure.
us about Cydney.
Sure, because it really does fold right into the whole conversation, because the show is about my life from 1974 to the present. Which covers my leaving New England. And I'm not a Portland native. I wasn't born here. I was born in Boston, which some Mainers find very disturbing.
No, they do.
But I was born and raised, I was raised outside of Boston, but my grandparents were from Portland, and I spent a lot of time in Maine in my youth, and always knew I was going to live here, and did get here as an adult to live. But anyway, so the show starts out with me moving from New England to Los Angeles. Okay. And it goes through the quirks of fate, and really they were quirks of fate, or coincidences, which we all know are minor miracles, in which God prefers to remain anonymous, at least in my view, in meeting Bob Crewe, who was the, if people don't know his name right off the bat, he discovered the Four Seasons.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And wrote all those songs. So think Jersey Boys. Yes. He's a character in Jersey Boys, which was diminished a little from his real role, but he produced and wrote all the Four Seasons hits. He also produced and wrote Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels hits. He worked with Michael Jackson, Leslie Gore. Oh my goodness. There a ton of stuff in the 60s and 70s, even in the 50s before any of us were around. Or I was around, but not cognizant. But Quirks of Fate, in which I met him and started to work with him. And then I crashed a party where I knew Elton John was going to be, and was on the road with him 2 days later. Really? So, all those stories are told. And so my early career as a solo artist, I had several albums out after I was finished with Elton as a solo artist, as Cydney Bullens. My first album that came out was called Desire Wire. It was nominated for a Grammy. Or I should say, I was nominated for a Grammy for Best Rock Vocal Performance in 1979. The year before, I was nominated for a Grammy for being a part of the Grease movie soundtrack.
Oh, okay, yes.
That was also a quirk of fate.
Okay.
And I ended up singing 3 lead vocals, Freddie My Love, Raining on Prom Night, and Mooning. So if you have the CD at home or the album at home, go look on the back and it says Cydney Bullens right there. There I am with Frankie Valli and, and Olivia Newton-John and John Travolta and all that stuff. So, and doing the Grease movie soundtrack is kind of fun for me because whenever I'm on the road, excuse me, even in Europe, in fact in Europe sometimes more than not, there's always somebody in the audience who has a Grease album that they want me to sign, which I think is really funny. But it was a great experience, and so I did my own albums, was nominated for a couple Grammys, and then in the midst of all that, I got married.
Okay.
And I'm not going to tell the whole story of the show because there are some quirks in there that people might find very interesting. Well, actually, in this case, I am going to tell it because this is called Diversity and Dignified. I married a gay man.
Okay. Did you know this?
Yes.
Okay.
I knew that, and he knew that how I felt about my gender, even though I had no thought that I was going to transition.
Did you have the language for that?
Back then, there was no word transgender.
Right.
It was transvestite or transsexual.
But you knew that.
But I knew that I was a man in a woman's body.
Yep.
I absolutely knew. I knew from the time I was 4 years old.
Okay.
And we're talking about the show, but we're also talking about my life.
Yes.
It's all the same.
Yes. Okay.
In the show, I talk about when I was 4 and came running down the stairs and told my mother not to call me Cindy anymore. Okay. My name was Bobby, and I go into, who knows why I picked that name, but, and she didn't do that, but that was my first indication of who I was. And then at 12, when I was up here in Maine on Chebeague Island and was running around with my shirt off, which I always did. Yeah, I was a boy.
Right.
I was not a girl unless my mother made me wear a dress.
Right.
And then it was excruciating.
Can I ask, were the kids around you, did they recognize your male?
I don't remember anybody really caring except my older sister and my mother. My brother didn't care, and I eventually had 2 younger sisters. They didn't care. And my mother really, she was exasperated with me, but she knew that there was something different about me. But she did make me wear a dress more than I wanted, and all that stuff. But I don't recall being teased.
Okay, good.
I guess is the best way to say it. And maybe it was because I was just who I was. I was so natural. And I stayed that way throughout my whole life. I never tried to be anything that I wasn't. Okay. Except when my kids were really, really little and I was living in Westport, Connecticut, and I tried really hard to wear a dress a couple of times and just kind of fit in with the Westport, Connecticut
moms.
It really didn't work and it didn't last.
Right.
But I never really tried, other than those few times, to be anything. I never. My wardrobe today is the same wardrobe it's been since I was 4.
Okay. So
sneakers and jeans.
What possessed you then to get married to a gay man? Go more into that. I'm curious.
Okay, so Dan, who I married, Dan Crew, is Bob Crew's brother.
Okay.
So I met Dan through Bob. Okay. Dan is older than me by 16 years. from the moment Dan and I met in Los Angeles when I was working with Bob, there was some kind of connection.
Okay.
And, you know, whatever anybody believes about fate or destiny or past lives or, you know, whatever it is, there was some kind of connection, as there was with Bob, but not in that way.
Sure.
With Dan, that was more than just meeting somebody.
Yep.
And he, as a gay man, and he's fine with me. Obviously, I talk about this in the show, so, and he's been out for quite a while. So he doesn't mind me talking about him. But he, as a gay man, had never been with a woman before, and he was already 40 by that time.
Okay.
I was 24. And, but there was something that was there for us, and we got together fairly quickly. That iteration of our relationship didn't last. There were too many other factors and too many other things going on for both of us. My career was starting up, and he was in, you know, doing stuff with Bob, and so. But a few years later, we came back to each other as friends,
Okay.
in a platonic relationship. And then one day he said, "I think we should get married." And I said, "You're kidding, right?" You know, and this was still out in Los Angeles. And by this time, my solo career was taking off.
Okay.
And I was on the road and making records and stuff like that. And I said, "No, I'm not going to get married. You know, what do I want to get married for? I've got a career. You know, I'm going to be a rock star. You
and
know."
for a woman too, back that. You know what I mean? I mean,
That's a whole other discussion. We can talk for like 3 hours about all of the tentacles of all of this. But yes, I was a woman rocker back then.
Yep.
I played electric guitar. There was nobody.
I was going to say, so you're
Nobody.
Yeah.
Susie Quattro, who was a bass player in the mid '70s, and there was a band called Fanny, who were starting. But Joan Jett hadn't come out yet. Pat Benatar hadn't come out yet. She didn't play guitar. But, you know, there was Linda Ronstadt, Joni Mitchell. You know, they were the more folk or soft rock singers. They weren't. I was a rocker. I was Mick Jagger personified.
Right.
As a female. In fact, they used to call me in the critics, you know, the female Mick Jagger.
Wow.
You know, I was jumping off pianos and had the guitar between my legs, and it wasn't an acoustic guitar. It was an electric guitar.
Yeah.
And, you know, just being wild. In fact, I cringe sometimes when I see some of the, you know, video of tape from back then. And I was writing my own songs. I wasn't doing somebody else's songs.
Right.
So I was the whole package, and people did not know what to do with me.
Right.
So that's a whole nother story.
Sure, we'll put it on hold. Yeah.
But, and I got rejected a lot because they did not know what to do with a record label. Let me just finish a point. That a record label would say, "Well, we already have a woman."
Right. Like there's some quota that's been
like
filled.
You're talking to, you know, Warner Brothers Records.
Yeah.
Which is huge.
Right.
And they have, you know, hundreds of acts. And they, well, we already have a solo woman who maybe was Linda Ronstadt at the time. You know, so it was crazy. And I didn't understand. I just didn't get it.
Sure.
I mean, my brain was never female, first of all.
No, it's why, sex,
and I just brain. Couldn't, I you know, I was like, what the hell? And somebody had to tell me, no, it's because you're a woman.
Yep.
And I was like, what?
Right.
It never had occurred to me. Not never. I just, it was baffling to me. But anyway, and so some of that, actually it fits right into what we're talking about with Dan, because some of the rejection, I did have a record deal, but my record company folded after my first album came out and after the first single was a hit and all that stuff. And I was trying to get signed by another record company, and they didn't want me to be who I was. They wanted me, and I say it in the show, they wanted me to wear tank tops and dangly earrings and not write my own songs and not produce my own records, which I was doing. And I said no.
Okay.
And right about that time, Dan was still saying, I think we should get married. I think we've got something. I think we should, explore this relationship. And because of the kind of what I was coming up against in the music business, juxtaposed with Dan saying, let's get married.
Sure.
At one point, I just said, oh, screw it.
Right. Yep.
Okay, let's get married.
Let's
Now,
just
not
do
because
it.
I didn't love him.
Right, no, I get
It's
that.
got nothing to, I didn't
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
I did have
Sure.
love for him. I did love him. And I did see a future with him as my partner, which wasn't a word we used back then, but still,
Yeah.
we were partners.
Yeah.
And because of just how hard it was for me in the record business back in those days,
Okay.
we did finally get married. And we moved from Los Angeles, where he hated to live. He had moved there for his brother Bob to help him, and he hated it. So we moved to New York, back to New York. We got married, and lived, as though, loved each other. We lived as a couple. I knew about him, he knew about me.
Okay,
We
yeah.
didn't talk about it to anybody else. I mean, his friends
Right.
knew. I mean, we weren't closed
Okay.
off. We just didn't publicize.
Sure.
But our close friends and family knew pretty much everything about us personally. But we loved each other, and we made a commitment, and we were monogamous, and then I got pregnant. We sat down and said, okay, are we gonna have kids?
Yep.
And the one thing about me, which I really always somewhere inside me, I always wanted to have kids. And I'm not sure that it matters whether that's a female or a male thing, or maybe it was hormonal as well as emotional for me. And if it was, that's fine.
Absolutely. I mean,
that's
I think
fine.
a lot of people want to nurture. a
and
child.
so when we sat down and we talked about, I can remember sitting on our couch in our apartment in New York City, talking about the fact that he was gay, talking about my feelings about my own body, and I had relationships with a couple of women before, but I was somebody, because of my gender issues, I really didn't want relationships. I didn't, as a young person,
Sure.
it
Now,
was
were
like,
you at
don't.
all, sometimes, especially folks our age, because we're older than the younger I sometimes feel the trans movement is a bit of a youth movement.
Yeah.
And so as an older person, were you at all confused about it being a gender or sexuality? I mean, or were you clear?
Well, I was clear about my own feelings about myself.
Okay.
However, this is kind of gets a little dicey here, because I was clear.
Yep.
I knew that I was not a lesbian.
Right.
And as a reaction to that, I actually hated the word. I didn't want to
Sure.
be called a lesbian.
Yep.
Even when I was in a relationship with a woman. Which,
Well, it's not to be disrespectful. It's a different.
and
it's a
it wasn't.
different-
And I would
yeah.
have these, arguments with my, or discussions, I should say, with my lesbian friends, of whom I had many.
Yep.
But it was like, no, I don't feel like that. But we didn't have the consciousness back then.
Or the terminology.
Or the terminology
Yeah, right.
to really put it into, no, this is who I am.
Yeah.
All I could say was, no, I feel like I'm a man in a woman's body.
Yep.
That's what I felt like.
Yep.
And I knew that I couldn't think like a woman. I would spend time watching commercials and watching women on TV,
Right.
just, women's roles, and trying to just kind of suss it out, like, okay, I feel none of that. I don't relate to that.
Yeah.
I would be in Westport, Connecticut, or in New York City, it didn't matter where. But let's say in Westport, Connecticut, where we lived in Connecticut for 9 years. You know, with a bunch of women, who knows what, I didn't cook or anything, so but let's say in preschool with my kids, and I'm helping with stuff, and I love doing all that stuff.
Yep.
But once I got away with the women and they started talking about certain things, I always felt like a fish out of water.
Yeah. It wasn't part of your...
It just...
Yeah.
I'm like, who won the Pats game? Not that women don't do that.
Right.
My sister it knows more about sports than anybody on earth. She's not a jock, but she should have been a sportscaster because she knows everything. She's a girl. She's a woman.
I want to ask you then, so when you had your children, how was that? Was that at all of a crisis in any way? I mean, wanting to have the children,
right.
And having the desire to nurture children, I think, is male or female.
Yeah.
But your body, tell us about the dysphoria.
It was really interesting.
Okay.
Let me just say, first of all, I loved having my children.
Okay, yes.
I loved being pregnant. With a little caveat, I would laugh at myself. I would look in the mirror and laugh.
Good.
Because I'm like, I have pictures in the multimedia part of my show, which is a lot of pictures of my life. There's a picture of me pregnant with Jessie, my second one, where I'm just like out 3 feet, I loved it because of the sheer power and awesomeness of carrying a life, of creating this life, and I'm carrying it.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with female or male.
Right, okay.
It was me being the carrier of this life.
Yeah.
Literally having a womb to carry it. And I had 2 natural childbirths, and I had breastfed both my children, which I talk about in the show. I loved it.
Okay.
The bonding experience of these kids was just an incredible thing for me. And I will say this, and I say it in my show, I wouldn't have traded that for anything. Nothing.
Okay. That's powerful.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Now, I had a moment when I was 19 years old, which I talk about in the show, where I'm in New York City and I go to the New York City Public Library and I find something on gender, a book on gender studies, and there's an address in the book, and I write away because to the address, which is Tulane University, because I want to know how to change my sex.
Tell us.
So at 19 years old, which I explain in the show, this is one of the 3 moments of my youth, which is a flashback, and I get the stuff, and I living in a hotel room, working a summer job, and I tear it all open, and it says, go to this clinic, go to that clinic, you start hormone therapy. This is before transgender ever existed.
Right,
this is
right.
still, transsexual territory. 19 years old, 1971 or whatever it was, and I read all of it, and I got really excited, and I said, oh my God, I can do this. And then I said, oh my God, I can't do this.
Okay.
So, all of this stuff, if I had done it then I wouldn't have regretted not having children, is what the point was. But I didn't. I went on, I had a career, I got married, and I had children.
Okay.
And it was and remains, even with the death of my second child, which we'll talk about, I wouldn't trade having those 2 children, the entire experience of being pregnant, carrying those kids, having natural childbirth, breastfeeding, raising them.
Yeah.
I wouldn't give it up for anything.
I'm so happy to hear that. Sid, I can see that the studio would like to transition to have you do a
song?
song. Would you be willing to do that?
I would love to do a song.
And then
for you.
after you do the song, then I'd like to pick up a little bit with one of your children.
Sure.
I know there's a tragedy with that, but we're going to break for a minute to listen to Sid do a song, and then we'll resume this conversation.
This is a song called Gravity and Grace. Gravity and Grace, they're two close friends of mine, but it's hard to get them in the same room at the very same time. Gravity's so grumpy, he brings everybody down. My friend Grace, on the other hand, she's the sweetest girl in town. Gravity I battle with, and he always makes me cry. I can't seem to win a fight, no matter how I try. Grace looks through the window, waiting for a sign. When I've had enough of gravity, she will find her way inside. And I have my suspicions that I've harbored for a while. When they pass each other in my life, I swear I see them smile. Yes, I have my suspicions that they're not so far apart. Maybe they have some secret covenant in matters of the heart. Grace I don't see often, so I'm grateful for her time. She has a way of soothing me that makes me feel just fine. But a funny thing always happens. I forget her when she's gone, and I let gravity hang out with me, and he stays for way too long. And I have my suspicions that I've harbored for a while. When they pass each other in my life, I swear I see them smile. Yes, I have my suspicions that they're not so far apart. Maybe they have some secret covenant in matters of the heart. I think they have some secret covenant in matters of the heart.
Thank you so much, Sid, for that song. It was terrific.
Thank you.
And I was hoping that we could sort of bring this back. Before we talked about you doing the song, you had two children, and I know there's a tragedy with one of them. Would you mind talking? Are you okay with talking about that?
Absolutely. My youngest daughter, my oldest daughter is Reed.
Okay.
And she was born in 1982. And Jessie was born in 1995. And when she was 10, she started just getting sick.
Oh, okay.
And we kept, in the fall of 95, we kept taking her to the doctor over and over again, and they kept telling us it was the flu. Finally, make that all short, she was diagnosed with fourth stage Hodgkin's disease in December of 95. And she died of an infection in March of 96. Very unexpectedly, quickly. But, and as people who have lost children know, it's life-changing. Completely changes every cell. I'll speak for myself. It changed every cell of my being. And, you know, I watched her take her last breath. So did my husband, Dan. It's just an experience that no one should ever have to go through. No. She died 3 weeks after her 11th birthday. Jessie, I'm going to talk about her for a minute because about her personality, because it has to do with how I dealt with the aftermath and the grief. Jessie was a red-headed Spitfire. She really was. I mean, I know people think that bereaved parents embellish their children and they glorify them and all this stuff. And if they do, so what?
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
That's right.
Go for it.
Right.
You know?
Yes.
Jessie really was this exceptional child. Both of my children are exceptional, I have to say.
And you're not at all. You're
I'm not biased, but it's true. Jessie just came out of the box with something else. My father used to call her a piece of work. And you just couldn't deny her presence, let's put it that way.
Okay.
And her spirit was so huge. She always saw the glass half full. It doesn't mean that she didn't have a little twinkle in her eye and, you know, cause some issues occasionally. She wasn't, you know, the perfect child, but she had a spirit that was huge and undeniable. And everybody knew it. From the time she was born. When she died, the void, of course, with any child gone, you don't fill.
No.
It can't be filled. And I talk, there's a whole section in my show about the aftermath of her death and what I did and what I went through, because it's my life. It's the story of my life. Yeah. And it reaches into what I'm doing today.
Yeah.
So in the aftermath, in the first 2 years after Jessie's death, I was compelled, and I use that word, compelled to write and record 10 songs.
Wow.
About her, about different moments in her grief. Now, I didn't sit down and say, hey, I think I'll write 10 songs and make an album about the death of my daughter. It didn't happen that way at all. It just happened. There were 3 months after her death, I wrote the first song, which is the title track of this particular CD or album called Somewhere Between Heaven and Earth. I wrote that song, and 3 months later I wrote another song, and 3 months later I wrote another song. And to give me something to do, because it's not like you lose a child and 3 months later you're
Oh,
okay.
fine. Right, yeah, yeah.
It took me 10 years to breathe again, to
Yeah.
even start thinking about living life for myself. It's been 20 years now, but it took me 10
Sure.
to dissipate, to have some of that cloud
Yeah,
and
lift a bit.
the bleakness dissipate. I mean, it was incremental, but that's how long
Sure,
it took.
sure.
But in the first 2 years, I wrote and recorded 10 songs. Each one was a moment in my grief, from 3 months
Yeah.
till almost 2 years.
Wow, okay.
So they're different levels. They were all songs that I was struck with. In other words, there was no thinking, no crafting. I was just, I just had to write them.
Yeah.
I was compelled to write those songs. And as I was doing, after the third song, so it's like 9 months from her death, I thought, okay, something's going on here. I didn't know then even it was an album or it was going to become the worldwide phenomena that it became. But I just said, okay, I'm going to record these. It'll give me something to do. So I went to Nashville, where I spent a lot of time, and I gathered my friends together and I recorded 3 songs.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, that's great. Not for anybody to hear,
Just for you.
for me to
Yeah.
do, and for me to have that experience. Give me something to look forward to, something to do, other than just sit in my bedroom and want to pull the covers up over my head. And of course, I had to parent Reed,
Yeah.
along with Dan, which is another whole story about her grief. And then I wrote a 4th song. I went to Paris with a friend, came back, wrote a song called The Lights of Paris, and I thought, okay, maybe this is going to continue. So then I thought, well, if I ever come up with enough songs, maybe I'll make an album of all these songs. But I couldn't sit down to write one of these songs because that wasn't the way it worked.
Okay.
So I had to wait and to see if I was going to be struck with another. I know this sounds crazy, but this is the spirit of Jessie. This was her doing. I had nothing to do with writing these songs except they came through me and putting together this album.
I see.
It was coming from, whether you call it the universe, God,
Sure.
whatever it was, I wasn't dictating.
Gotcha.
And so I wrote over the next years, I got the 10 songs. And as I didn't write them and then go record them. I wrote one, recorded it, wrote 1 or 2, and then or 3, and then recorded it, all with different people. So I ended up with, and this was also Jessie working, Bonnie Raitt singing on a song, who's
my
a
goodness.
dear friend of mine. He's been a friend of mine for 45 years. No, I'm not that old. 41 years. Not that much of a difference, but it makes a difference, tell you. So Bonnie sang on it, Lucinda Williams sang on it, Bryan Adams sang on it. These are all people who were friends of mine and who I knew. Rodney Crowell, if you don't know who he is, a wonderful singer-songwriter from Nashville, has written and produced many songs. He produced and part of the album. Musicians who, are the top caliber. Over that time of 2 years, from the time Jessie died till 2 years, I had an album called Somewhere Between Heaven and Earth. And I thought, and on the cover is Jessie's artwork. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do with this now? Because I didn't have a record deal. I didn't have, I paid for whatever had to be paid. People did me favors. People did it for nothing. Whatever did have to be paid for, the studios or whatever, I did it. I did it in Nashville and Los Angeles and New York. I went everywhere and anywhere that I could to make this happen. A friend So I press up 1,000 copies and I sell them at $20. I sign each one and give $25 and give $25,000 to the Maine Children's Cancer Program. I thought, okay, done. That's a wonderful thing.
Yep.
That's fantastic. Then a friend plays it for a friend, I get a record deal. I get an offer for a record deal in New York City. I go to New York City with Dan. We meet with the record company president. I say to him, this is an album about my daughter and her death. I would rather sell it out of the back seat of my car than have it compromised in any way by promotion or whatever. He said, I promise, I know what it is. So I licensed the album, got a record deal. It came out on a worldwide basis and became the greatest album of my life.
Wow.
And the most commercially successful album.
Yeah. Wow.
I didn't care about the commercially successful part about it, but that happened.
Yep.
The more important thing that happened was that from every corner of the earth, and I'm not exaggerating, South Africa, Western Australia, Singapore, Alaska, you know, all over Europe, anywhere, South America, I mean, I'm thinking every state, people have somehow found this album, bereaved parents, or people who need to hear it.
Yeah.
And it was the beginning of me doing 15 years of work with bereaved parents, doing workshops and, you know, in colleges and universities and for palliative care and hospice conferences and doctors' conferences, caregivers, all over the world, really.
Wow.
And so for 15 years I did that. And that album gave me that. So Jessie gave me that
gift. Yeah.
She gave me that gift, so I got to be of service with my music. Now, within all of that, within that 15 years, I recorded other albums and I went out and did other things and started getting on with my life. Had a 5-year relationship with a woman, a beautiful woman, after I got divorced from Dan, and that ended and whatever, but I started to experience my life, all as Cindy.
Okay.
All of it as Cydney Bullens.
Okay.
And then 5 years ago.
Tell us, do tell. What was the catalyst?
5 years ago, I received a call. I had finally come, let me just preface it by saying I had finally come to a point in my life as Cindy. And again, wardrobe the same, talk the same, my actions are the same. You know, there's really not much different to me, except that it's taken me 5 years to grow the scruff on my my chin and my face. You know, that's about it. And of course, I use male pronouns now, and I'm being a little bit facetious about being the same, but I basically am the same person.
Happier, probably.
I'm happier.
Yes.
Much happier.
Yes.
I feel more within myself. I'm more free.
Can I ask then, so at what point, so it was 5 years ago that you medically transitioned, socially transitioned?
Started.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, at what point did you decide, hey, you know, I'm done doing it this way, it's time?
Well, this is what happened.
Okay.
So I get a call from a really good friend of mine, a younger friend who had moved away. We were very close. We shared a lot of, you know, intimate parts of our lives with each other, but never once talked about being transgender. I thought he was a young lesbian. He thought I was gay. You know, I mean, we talked about a lot of things, but we
Just
never,
not that. Yeah.
that never came up. He moved away. He Facebook messaged me one day and said, I need to talk to you. I got to tell you something. And I kind of said, oh, I wonder what that is. And I kind of had an inkling, but didn't know. Finally, we talk on the phone. He's got a lower voice. he says, this is 5 years ago. I started transitioning from female to male a year ago. And every cell of my being became alert. And as I say in the show, there are actually lines saying, I asked every question I had wanted to ask for 50 years.
I bet.
And and I did. And we stayed on the phone for quite a while. When I hung up the phone, I actually dropped to my knees and started sobbing. It had broken, in all of the things I had addressed in my life. I'd been to therapy for marriage, I'd been to therapy for my, for losing Jesse, I'd been to therapy for trying to be a better parent or whatever, had, spiritual guidance for this, that, and the other thing. Never had I addressed
that issue.
And now we can call it transgender because it's been a word. Never.
So that must have been a relief.
So I dropped to my knees, and it's like this flood of memories of the past, and it really was almost like, oh my God, it was, oh my God, I've never addressed this issue. I'm almost 60 years old.
Wow.
And I think my initial feeling was I missed it.
Yeah.
I missed it. I missed it. I missed, being who I am. And so I think part of the sobbing was this acknowledgement of who I am and that I had never fully been who I am.
Right. Never been able to embrace it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I got off the floor. I called my daughter, Reed, who by that time was married and had 2 kids of her own, 2 babies. And she lived across the street at the time. And I said, I got to talk to you. I'm picking you up. I was still crying. I picked her up. She knew.
I was going to ask you
She knew
that.
because I had told, there's a funny bit in the show about me talking to Reed when she was 18 about it. And it's very funny. She provides a lot of fodder for the show. My daughter is...
So was it a news flash for her then?
No, what she said was, Mom, you have to do something about this now.
Okay.
So from that point, from once I got my daughter's permission,
I understand.
blessing.
Sure. Yep.
Because if she had said, not now, I probably wouldn't have done it.
Okay.
It would have killed me not to do it.
Sure.
But once I got her blessing, it was like a fire.
Yeah.
That was in early July of 2011.
Okay. Yep.
September 1st, 2011, I had my first shot of testosterone.
Wow. Now, this is totally digressing a smidge. Being a musician, were you at all concerned about taking testosterone?
Oh, yeah.
I bet. Okay.
I started out, I did a lot of research. I mean, in this 2 months between, I was completely obsessed. Completely obsessed.
Okay.
And, did all the research and read all the books I could possibly do because I didn't know anything.
What to expect, yeah.
I mean, I knew,
Well, 2011 still wasn't a tremendous awareness.
No,
really.
there wasn't. Chaz Bono's book had just come out.
That was about all.
And that was it. But I did a lot of YouTube watching and, I was fascinated by the little young people who were transitioning but did a lot of reading. Anyway, but because I was still a working musician, I didn't want my voice to change rapidly.
Yeah.
So I went on a very low dose of testosterone first. I had to go to, as you know, back then it was still, you had to go to therapy. You had to be diagnosed as gender dysphoric. So I went to Boston, went to a gender therapist. She got it right away. And I started, on September 1st, I started with a very low dose. In fact, I didn't come out as transgender. I changed my name.
Okay.
which was a clue for people. But I didn't come out as transgender until June of 2012 when I wrote an article for the Daily Beast.
Okay.
And it came out nationally then.
Then you came forward.
Then I came out. And then, you know, if we had time, we could talk about the second guessing.
I think we're going to have to get you as a sequel because I can see it's about time to wrap up, and I want to get another song in.
Okay, we can do that.
I'm gonna just wrap this up. I've really enjoyed this thoroughly. Viewers, thank you for tuning in to Diversity Dignified. We've touched on quite a few issues here. So we have another older person, talking about
I'm older than you.
Yes, not much. Later, how it is to come out later in life, and we've talked about a phenomenal loss and grief and cancer, and you've heard a great song, and you're going to hear another one. I thank you so much for tuning in, and until next month. Thank you, viewers.
This is the opening song of my solo performance show, Somewhere Between Not an Ordinary Life. And this is rocker, kind of autobiographical, and it's called Sensible Shoes. I should be standing up, but I'm going to sit down. Way back when I was a little kid, I never did what the other kids did. They used to call me trouble, but I was just doing my thing. Well, people kept saying it would do me good to step back in line like they thought I should, but I ain't no puppet with somebody jerking my string. Well, I'm not rational, can't be practical. I like to walk any way that I choose. I don't want to put my feet on the ground, and I don't want to walk in no sensible shoes. Well, now that I'm older, not much has changed. I make my own rules and I don't play no games. I don't follow fashion, I like bucking the trend. Well, everybody thought I'd have to see the light, but hey, look at me, I'm doing alright. Well, these shoes must be working, 'cause I just got lucky again, baby. Well, I'm not rational, can't be practical. I like to walk any way that I choose. I've never had my feet on the ground, and I've never walked in no sensible shoes. Wow! Take off your sneakers, baby. Slip on something with heels. Yeah! How about some snakeskin boots or something, just to see how it feels? Wow! Well, I'm not rational, can't be practical. I like to walk any way that I choose. I've never had my feet on the ground, and I've never walked in no sensible shoes, baby. Yeah, yeah.